Is Syracuse basketball's roster complete?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're talking about if Syracuse basketball's 2024-25 roster is complete, and then a little bit of a recruiting update for the class of 2025. So we're going to talk about the present and then the future. Let's begin, though, with the present, of course, and Syracuse's recent addition of Lucas Taylor. If you recall, I gave you guys 5 things that Lucas Taylor brings to Syracuse. And in case you missed yesterday's podcast, I'll give them for you right now. He is potentially a backup shooting guard with upside. He is insurance on Elijah Moore, right? Elijah Moore doesn't have to be great right away as a low-end 4-star recruit. He could be used a little bit at the 3, which is nice for depth purposes on the wing. He does provide a little bit of shooting, right? 35% from 3 last season, 40% the year before Wake Forest, albeit in limited attempts. And number 5 is clarity, right? Syracuse finally lands another transfer after 6 weeks. It's been a long time. But notice there was one thing that I left out of there. I did not say that the Lucas Taylor addition means that Syracuse basketball's roster is complete, because I don't believe it is. Now, it is fairly obvious to say that, well, Syracuse has filled 11 of its 13 scholarships, so obviously it's not complete. And to that I say, not every team fills all 13. You can get away with having 11 scholarship players, even 12 scholarship players on the roster. That's not the concern. There is still one more need for this team, and it's not the end-all, be-all need, right? If Syracuse doesn't get this, it doesn't mean that they're going to be out of tournament consideration by anything. This is not a needle-moving need here. But they could still use a backup power forward or center. Someone that might be able to just play both. Really someone, to me, that is 6'9" or above. That's what I would be looking at this point. Lucas Taylor can play the 3 as a small ball, because he's 6'5". You figure he can play a little bit of the 3. But when I look at the official forwards and centers on the roster right now for Syracuse, there's Chris Bell, there's Jair Davis, there's Donnie Freeman, Eddie Lampkin, and Naheem McLeod. Not complaining about that whatsoever. I think that is a very, very solid 5. Definitely much better than it was last season in the front court. Here's the problem, though. And I've said this before on the podcast. What happens if Eddie Lampkin and or Naheem McLeod miss a game? What happens if they get hurt? Knock on wood. I hope you guys could hear that. I hope the mic picked that up. But I did knock on the table just now. We don't wish injury upon anyone, but this is sports, and they do happen. What happens if one of them gets hurt? Well, all of a sudden, the front court becomes a little bit thinner, right? The backup center then becomes Donnie Freeman. So you're thinner at forward. You got to play Freeman at the 5 for backup purposes. And keep in mind that Naheem McLeod, I don't know if injury prone is the right word, but he has dealt with, or the right phrase, but he has dealt with injuries over the course of his collegiate career. That's fact. He's missed a lot of time with injuries. So you can't necessarily bank on him being healthy an entire season. Now, Eddie Lampkin has been healthy for the most part in his college career. Don't want to jinx it or anything like that, but that's the truth. But what happens if one of those guys gets hurt or they miss a game? Something happens. What happens? Syracuse needs another backup forward or center that is at least 6'9", because you need some insurance. Kind of like how Lucas Taylor provides insurance on Elijah Moore, you need insurance on a power forward / center. You don't want Donnie Freeman to have to become the backup center for this team. Not that he probably can't play it, but you just don't want players playing out of position. And then you're thinner at forward. So then you only have Chris Bell and Jair Davis as your forwards. You don't want that. Now, as far as guys that Syracuse could possibly target, again, I'll give you the splash options, but I don't think Syracuse is in the market for a splash at this point. But hold on that for a moment, because there's something going on in UConn. I mean, Coleman Hawkins would be great. He would be terrific, right? The transfer from Illinois, he recently pulled out of the NBA draft, one of the top players still available in the portal. He's a power forward. He just took a visit to Louisville, so I imagine he probably ends up there, and Louisville is probably going to be pretty good at basketball next season, so they're back, and that's not very good for us. He wouldn't come off the bench if he were to come to Syracuse, but I don't see that really happening because I don't think Syracuse is in the market for that type of player. Arthur Kaluma, a former Syracuse recruit, he would be great. The transfer from Kansas State. But again, he's not a backup option. And would he probably be a starter for Syracuse next season? Yes. And do you turn down top-tier talent if they want to play for you? Absolutely not. You never turn down top-tier talent if they want to play for you. Like, remember when they were involved in Kadari Richmond and it seemed like they have a lot of guards available? Well, Kadari Richmond, if he wants to play for your school, you're saying yes. You say yes. Here, take it. What do you want? You let him play. It's similar with Arthur Kaluma and Coleman Hawkins if they were to want to come to Syracuse, but I just don't see it happening. They're more in the market of the more backup standpoint. A possible option that I have written down is John Evius Smith from Buffalo. He is a 6'9" power forward, 3-star in the transfer portal. Last season, he averaged 8 points and 8 rebounds, and he was also 37% from three. Let me repeat that. He averaged 8 points and 8 rebounds last year at Buffalo and was 37% from three as a 6'9" power forward. I don't think he would be a starter by any means. He is only a 3-star in the transfer portal. That's the type of player that you're searching for. That's the one you want. Someone who's going to be willing to come off the bench and be serviceable when called upon. I know people are going to say, what about William Patterson? And I have mentioned it a number of times here on this podcast, but Mike McAllister recently reported on Cuse Sports Talk that a William Patterson and Syracuse reunion is probably not going to happen. Not looking likely on that front. Although I would take him back, given that they could use another backup in the front court. I would take him. Just not likely to happen. Now, that would fill one scholarship for Syracuse if they were to get a backup caliber power forward / center. But they would still have one more left. And you don't need to fill it, but if you can, why would you not? Why would you not fill it if you have the opening? You don't need to fill all 13, but if you have one left, again, why? You have it, use it. So I'm going to mention this, and this is more speculation than anything, so I will preface it by that. But I think it's important to know. Now, Adrian Wojnarowski recently reported, it was this morning, that Dan Hurley, the head coach of UConn, who has led the Huskies to back-to-back national titles, some of the great teams I've seen in a long time, just blitzing their way through the tournament every single year. I mean, seriously, they win every single game by double digits in the tournament. It's unbelievable. And the first team to repeat as a champion since the Florida Gators, I believe in 06, 07, when they had Al Horford, Joakim Noah, all those great teams. Point being is that Dan Hurley, the leader of that squad, the head coach, is possibly leaving to get the head coaching job for the Lakers. The LA Lakers of the NBA, to coach the one and only LeBron James. Obviously, it's a great opportunity for him. And I think that given that he can always go back to college, this is, if the money is right, living in California, getting to coach the LA Lakers of all teams, not the Detroit Pistons. No shade, no disrespect to the Detroit Pistons, but The LA Lakers being open is one of the premier jobs in all of basketball, college and pro. I believe it's certainly possible, given this report, that Dan Hurley is leaving UConn and going to the Lakers. What this means, and my point with all of this, is that UConn players, in the event this happens, will receive a 30-day window to enter the transfer portal. And now I know what you guys are saying. The transfer portal is closed. What do you mean by that? Let me explain. If a coach leaves, each player on the roster gets a 30-day window to enter the transfer portal. In other words, the portal reopens for those players. They are allowed to enter in. They are certainly allowed. It is similar to the Noah Waterman situation at BYU. He was able to enter the transfer portal after the window closed because he got a 30-day extension because his coach left for Kentucky, Mark Pope. And Noah Waterman ended up committing to Louisville, by the way. Again, Louisville just getting everyone. They got Noah Waterman. They might get Coleman Hawkins. Not looking good in the ACC in that regard. So my point is that if you have that open spot left, I'm not saying it's likely. It's probably unlikely. I wouldn't bank too much on it. I'm being honest with you. But if you're Syracuse, you're not far from UConn. You're in the Northeast. Why not try to poach someone away? Their head coach is leaving. Do you remember what happened with Kentucky? How basically everyone left their roster. Now, granted, they did fill in those spots pretty well. They should be a top 15 to 25 team in the country heading into next season. But still, a lot of players left. A lot of players even left Louisville before they filled it up with better players, but a lot of players transferred out of Louisville. Is it possible that players will leave UConn? If they do, if you're Syracuse, you have to ask. You have to just reach out. I'm not saying you're going to get one of them or anything like that, but you have to reach out. The guy that I would look at is the point guard that they got in the transfer portal, Aiden Mahaney. Not to be confused with Aiden Mahoney or August Mahoney. Again, it is confusing. August Mahoney, Aiden Mahaney, they're basically the same name. But he's a point guard, a career 38% three-point shooter in his 2 seasons at St. Mary's. He committed to UConn in the transfer portal this season. He would immediately be the starting point guard for this team. And you have the open spot to do it. Again, I'm not saying it's possible. Or I'm not saying it's probable to happen. It is certainly possible. I'm not saying it's probable. Is Syracuse going to be able to poach away someone from UConn because their coach left? I don't know. I imagine that other schools are going to get involved, bigger ones than Syracuse that still have open spots remaining. But hey, you're in the Northeast. Ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst you get is no. So I would ask. So in conclusion, is Syracuse basketball's roster complete for next season? To me, the answer is no. I still think they could use another backup power forward / center in the event that someone gets hurt. You don't wish injury upon anyone, but it is possible to happen in this sport. And number 2, due to Dan Hurley leaving UConn potentially with those players becoming available, and you still have another open spot if you get a backup power forward / center, you have to at least inquire if you're able to poach away one of those guys. It would be great. Not saying it's probable, but you have to at least make the ask. Now, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit of Syracuse basketball 2025 recruiting. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we're going over at the Syracuse Basketball 2024 roster is complete, and I already gave you that answer in case you missed it. No, I don't think it's complete. They could still use a backup power forward or a center, and hey, if UConn's players get that extra 30-day transfer portal window, then you got to at least inquire to see if one of them might be interested in going to Syracuse. That's all I'll say about that. Now let's talk about the future and Syracuse basketball in their 2025 recruiting efforts. Obviously, it's off to a very hot start with five-star forward, 24/7 Sports composite five-star forward Sadiq White committing to Syracuse just last week. Huge depth for the Orange. This is someone who I can imagine will cause other players to follow suit. He is that good, one of the best defenders in the class, and still has plenty of upside on the offensive end if he can improve that jumper of his. Now, let's go to some other players. So Syracuse is now in the lead for 2025 four-star forward from Connecticut. He is a consensus top 60 prospect. London Jemison on 3 prediction machine has Syracuse right now at an 88% chance of landing him. So that's pretty good, 88%. He recently took an official visit to Syracuse, and that is his only official visit in his recruitment process so far. So Syracuse certainly in good shape in that regard to land London Jemison. Again, it's not a lock, it's not a guarantee, but if you can get a guy like London Jemison to pair with Sadiq White, oh boy. This 2025 recruiting class, in terms of the players that they're offering and the odds that they're getting, the odds that they can get them, and the fact they already got Sadiq White, could really be special. This could be a really, really good recruiting class. I'm giving you permission to have hope about it. Okay? I'm giving you permission. So London Jemison looking pretty good regarding Syracuse's odds in landing him. Syracuse also recently offered a big man. I've talked about a number of times that it seemed like Syracuse basketball is going to go portal hunting next year again for a center. Naheem McLeod won't be back, years of eligibility. Eddie Lampkin, same thing, years of eligibility. They don't have him left, so Syracuse is without a center for next season. Not the end of the world, but I said they would probably have to go portal hunting given their offers right now in the recruitment process. Well, that has changed. They have offered a center. It is Chris Senac Jr. from New Orleans. He is On Three's number 6 overall player in the class. He is a 5-star, so this is a big-time big man, 6'10". And Senac recently said that he was surprised that he got the offer from Syracuse. I mean, obviously, he's got plenty of schools that are pursuing him, mainly LSU, given that he's from the area. But he was surprised that Syracuse reached out and that Syracuse eventually offered him. Don't know the exact odds or to what degree Syracuse has interest in him, but nevertheless, they have offered Chris Senac. So we'll be monitoring to see if the odds shift or if Syracuse has a legitimate possibility of landing him or if they're just sending an offer to see the field. Okay. Moving on, let's talk about Kiyan Anthony. Obviously, he has a pretty high percentage of committing to Syracuse. The On3 prediction machine gave it about a 90% chance that he commits. And he did post on his Instagram story when Sadiq White committed to Syracuse. So that's not nothing, in my opinion. Is it possible they're a package deal? Sure. Now, there were some signs that, or there were some alarm bells that people recently raised. And this is because Kiyan Anthony a report came out that he is looking to set up visits with Indiana, Auburn, and Ohio State. And Syracuse was not mentioned of those three. But this is why I kind of will tell everyone to take a little bit of a deep breath. Like, everyone just breathe. Syracuse not included in those three. What's going on? Well, he's already visited Syracuse. He's already visited. And like I've said, it's not like Carmelo, his dad, is telling him you have to commit to Syracuse. This is his own recruitment process. Let's see how it plays out. As far as who I would worry about most, this is coming from the reporting of Mike McAllister, and it makes a lot of sense. But Indiana is the school to watch out for with regards to Kiyan Anthony potentially not going to Syracuse. And this is because Mike Woodson is the head coach at Indiana. He obviously was the coach of Carmelo Anthony in New York. They have a strong relationship, and Indiana has plenty of NI opportunities to offer. So it's certainly possible that Kiyan Anthony is an Indiana Hoosier. It's possible. I think he's going to end up committing to Syracuse. That's my opinion. But he is looking at other schools and trying to set up potential visits. So it's not a lock, so to speak, that he is committing to Syracuse. And now moving on, there are so many players to talk about with 2025, and I promise you I'm going to get them at some point over the course of the summer. So just giving you a little bit of a brief outline here of what's going on. Syracuse is still in the lead for four-star guard Tyler Jackson. He is a guard from Maryland. The odds are above 50% on him. He has officially visited Syracuse, and if you recall, when I had Sam Kaiser, 24/7 high school sports, when I had him on the podcast, he said that really it's between Syracuse and Maryland, and if there's any school that's going to take Tyler Jackson away from Syracuse, it would be Maryland. He was saying that Syracuse is a high probability of landing him. So when I look at it, and this is a good tease for Poll Friday coming up, which is tomorrow. It's a good tease. Syracuse could be looking at a recruiting class of three or more people. 3 or more recruits in it. They already got Sadiq White. Got to make sure you hold on to him, though. They're in the lead for Kiyan Anthony, even though he's setting up visits elsewhere. They're in the lead with London Jemison, and they're in the lead with Tyler Jackson. You can get all those guys. If you can get all of those players, that's 4. And that would be, at minimum, a top 10 recruiting class in the country, but I would probably guess, due to the volume and the quality of those players, all of them being high-end 4 stars or 5 stars, that you would be looking at a top 5 recruiting class in the country. So that's where Syracuse stands regarding 2025 recruiting right now. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we're wrapping up today's show. We talked about if Syracuse basketball's roster for next season is complete. And I told you guys, with the addition of Lucas Taylor, while it does fill a roster spot, and I gave you guys 5 things that he does not complete the roster. I still think Syracuse could use another backup center, power forward, someone who is at least 6'9" in the event of injury. You can always have more. You can never have enough depth on the roster. You can never have enough. So I do think that Syracuse should be pursuing another power forward / center. Probably will not be a big splash at this stage of the game. It probably won't, but someone who can come off the bench when called upon and provide serviceable minutes, that would be great. I mentioned the guy from Buffalo as being a potential solution. I also gave you guys a little bit of a 2025 Syracuse basketball recruiting update. They are in the lead for London Jemison, a 2025 4-star forward. He is 6'7", top 60 consensus national prospect. They also offered Chris Senack from New Orleans, who is a 5-star center. Kiyan Anthony, while they do have a high percentage of getting him, he is looking to set up visits elsewhere beyond just Syracuse, because Syracuse is already had a visit, or Syracuse has already hosted Kyan Anthony, so I'm not too worried, but still, he is looking to set up visits elsewhere. And they are still in the lead for 4-star guard Tyler Jackson from Maryland, so the odds are looking pretty good on him. I believe the prediction meter had it at above 50%. So that's good regarding that. Now, coming up on the rest of the podcast for tomorrow, it is Poll Friday, and I asked you guys the question of how many recruits do you think the Syracuse Basketball 2025 class will have? Last year, they had 2, which is Donnie Freeman and Elijah Moore. The year before, they only had 1, and that was William Patterson. So will it be the year that they get 3 or more players? And that's to come tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.